Hey everyone, welcome to Unleash Your Leadership. This is the series where I talk to you about different topics, and hopefully in the future, I'm looking to get some guests on the show as well. So if you have recommendations for people you would like to hear to learn about their stories, how they unleashed their leadership, just let me know. Message me, DM me, whatever works for you. And I'm really thankful that you all are interested in these topics. I shared out what are some of the things that you would like to hear me talk about. And of the three things that I put out, you told me about imposter syndrome and that you would like to hear more about this. And this is a really important subject to talk about. So today we are going to talk about imposter syndrome and how to kill imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is really, that feeling of self doubt that we all feel from time to time. It is this sort of perceived incompetence. We think that we are not good enough, that something happened to us just by luck, by chance, and it wasn't necessarily our effort that resulted in the accomplishments. And often the reason it's called imposter syndrome is because there is accomplishments, there is results that are we are seeing, but in spite of those, we believe that we are not worthy of those or those happened just by chance. It is it is this feeling of fraud, and then we fear that we will be discovered, like somebody will come to know that that this person is not good enough, or oh, I'm a fraud and this person is going to find it out. um, and the reason I kind of smile a little bit is because I think we all know somewhere that it's not true, that our own thinking that we are not good is not true, but we still do it, we still feel it. And this is very fascinating to me because we humans are so complex, and sometimes we can make up a lot of these stories in our head, and we can think of this. And the reason this is important to talk is because a lot of us feel this, but also because sometimes it can get detrimental. It can become sort of this self-fulfilling prophecy where if you don't have confidence, and if you continue to believe that you're not good enough, somewhere it will show up in the work you do. Somewhere that lack of confidence, that continuous sort of self-doubt will creep into it, and it can eventually lead to sort of proving, in quotation marks, what you thought about yourself. So it's really important to get over this feeling of being an imposter, uh, not deserving to be here. Because if you are in a certain place, if you have achieved a certain result, if you have got into a certain position, it is because you deserved it, because you made it happen through various efforts or actions that you took. And so you want to continue to make impact in whatever role you're, whatever you're doing in that time period. You want to take advantage of it, and so you want to keep this imposter syndrome at bay, or be able to manage it so that you can sort of bring out your whole self. Now, I have also experienced this. Like I said, we all do at some point or the other. Many of us do. If you have never experienced it, and you're like, what is this imposter syndrome? I don't believe anything you're saying. Just we'd love to hear from you, because I think it's important to also understand if you don't feel it, and what is the difference there. And I'll talk about something a little bit later, which I think might be related to this. Like, if you have never felt it, like, that's amazing, and I would love to hear from you. My experience with it has, well, it has It has been there, and at least through sort of some introspection and retrospection that I've done based on this topic, I felt it. For example, when I was at Facebook and I would interview candidates, so after about being at Facebook for 6 months, you can start into interviewing other candidates. And I went through that interviewer training process, and I started interviewing them. And I would look at these interviews, and I was doing certain types, but I was also sitting in debriefs and hearing about some of the other questions that were being asked or how the candidates did. And at that point, it was probably 6 months after I was at the company. I was like, oh man, these interviews are tough. Like, did I just luck out and my interview wasn't? Like, I would think that way. Now, it is not necessary that that was true, because no, my interview was, tough. I had prepared a lot for it. But afterwards, even after coming to Facebook and working on in highly challenging environment where there was a lot of focus on impact and a lot of sort of a race to showcase your ability and your skill set, that feeling would creep in from time to time. But I remember this particularly when I would with respect to the interviews. Right? The other moments that I have felt it is when I transitioned into leadership positions, and I was given opportunities to lead a team, lead an organization. Again, that crept in, because sometimes you think, oh, this person is equally capable of doing this. Is this something that is just by fluke? Maybe I don't have the abilities. Did I do something else? So you start doubting your abilities, and you also think, okay, maybe what got me this thing is sort of like a little bit shady. But again, like I said, there may not be truth in what I was thinking. Um, Finally, the other thing I want to tell you is, like, just recently, I left my job. I started out my coaching practice. I am coaching a lot of professionals to build their leadership skills, build their people skills. But at the same time, I still feel this, oh, there are so many great coaches out there, so many great leaders out there. Am I qualified to do this? Like, who am I to start this practice? Who am I to start a business? You know? And so there's always those doubts, like, oh, I don't think I'm good enough to become this solo entrepreneur who is starting this coaching practice, who's doing this other thing, all the things I have envisioned for my venture. I still feel that doubt creeping in. And I feel, oh, should I just follow this other path? Would that be better? So for me, it happens, it comes and goes in waves, and it isn't necessarily very crippling or happening sort of 100% of the time. I also know that I have worked really hard at every step in my career. And so when I do accomplish something, it is not by happenstance, it is because I put in that effort. And to me, that is very clear because I put in that effort. It took a lot of effort. So even though these doubts creep in and I experience the imposter syndrome, it doesn't become crippling enough. But I am sure that sometimes it can be crippling, which is why I wanted to touch upon how you can kill the imposter syndrome. What can you do to really get past it? And these are also some of the things that I have done. Sometimes I've done them intentionally. Sometimes I've done them just by chance. I kind of did it, and then I realized, oh, doing this really helped me. So that's my learning that I want to share with you, and I hope it helps you as well. So number one, in order for you to understand if this is imposter syndrome or if this is something else and validate your feelings, you want to talk with other people around you. Find people that you trust, that you can hold in confidence. It can be your spouse, it can be a friend, it can also be a colleague. Talk to them about what you're feeling, or talk to them about certain actions you're taking, and if you're not seeing some results, or if you just have this sense, if you have a sense of a work project or something, or if you have a if you're working with somebody and you have this feeling and then you want to validate it. Because what talking to others does is it really validates your feelings. Are you the only one feeling like that? Because often when we experience these feelings of self doubt, we feel that we are the only one experiencing it. So it is really important to talk it out, to articulate your feelings with the people who are most likely to support you, who you trust in, and who can be your confidants. It can be a spouse. So, for example, I will go talk to my spouse, and he has a very different way of thinking. So, it actually really helps me because he thinks really differently from me. And this is where sort of going back and forth helps. But what has also helped me really a lot is talking to colleagues at work. Some folks, when I just started talking about a certain experience I was having, and they mentioned that they were feeling the same way about either a situation, a person, or something like that. That's when it hit me like, oh, I'm not the only one. And that feeling was so powerful because it really helped ground me. It really gave me a different perspective. Because, like I said, there is a perceived incompetence. That perception is our own, that we are incompetent. But sometimes it can be the situation around you, the circumstances around you. And there is enough evidence that it is not you. And so you want somebody else's perspective in there as well. Because only when you have different perspective can you understand the entire picture. So if you were to do this exercise, which is like if you were to just close one eye, like do this with me, if you're listening to me or if you're watching me right now, close one eye and look around the room. What perspective do you have? Right? You have a different perspective, and if you close the other eye, you have a different perspective. But only when your both eyes are open, you see the full picture with an entire perspective, right? But when you have the two eyes and you're looking differently, you see the room differently. You can do this anywhere except driving. um, so that's what I mean. Talk to somebody. The second thing I want you to do is separate fact from fiction. Fiction or stories in your head. We human beings are great at crafting stories. Not only do we write stories, we make movies, all of that, but we can create a story in our head and we will start believing that story. And it can happen very fast. I was just listening to somebody's presentation recently, and it was almost, like, for example, if somebody cuts you off while you're driving, you can immediately go from like, oh, this person is so and so, and you start crafting a story about this person and how this person is not nice and they cut me off and all of that. Whereas the fact could be something totally different. And so it's the same thing for us as well, is the stories that we create, that we tell ourselves, are very different than the reality on the ground. In 2018, I went to this silent meditation called Vipassana. And it is really basically to observe yourself, your body, and your mind. It has a lot about the meditation mindfulness principles that if you do that, you will know. But one of the key things that really resonated with me was this concept of story creation that we have, and that we do. And I could have a whole different uh, series or an episode about just how we create stories in our head. But what is important then is for you to sort of take a step back and say, okay, what are the facts? What is the data telling me? Right? So in my example, when I said I knew that I had worked hard for the interview. I would go back to what was asked of me in the interview and how I answered it, right? That is data. That is the facts. The story that I created it, oh, it was probably easy. Oh, this interviewer was probably didn't ask me a lot of hard questions. Or maybe I lucked out on who this interviewer was, and maybe the recruiter didn't find the hard interviewer. That is a story. But the fact is, I have prepared and I gave these answers, and these were the things that were asked. So give yourself space to think. If you have gotten to a position, what are the things that you did, the data and the facts that got you there? And then analyze it. Okay, that's my facts. How does that relate to the story? So once you even separate it out, I think you'll automatically have a very powerful sense of idea that what I'm telling myself is not the reality. Now, again, doing this, separating fact from fiction, is a hard thing to do. You have to exercise your muscle, you have to build awareness around it. So, I encourage you to continue to think that. And there's lots of different ways you can do it. You can sort of think back to the time when you felt really powerful, or you can, do certain exercises like think about what a 20-year sort of senior version of yourself would tell you today. Okay? So you can also do this. Finally, the third thing I want you to do is don't compare yourself to somebody who is sort of at the topmost of their game. So, for example, if you join a new company, or for example, in my case, me joining Facebook was the first time I was ever working in such a big company. I'd always worked in startups or really small companies up until that point. So I didn't necessarily understand the entire landscape. But if I compare myself to somebody who's been there 5 years, who knows the in and outs, knows the culture, knows a lot of people, has built a ton of relationships, and I'm new, if I compare myself to that person, I'm going to set myself up for failure. It's the same thing even today, where in me starting out as an entrepreneur or a solar venture, I I look at people who have been doing this. I read about them. I've been reading a lot. I've been listening to a lot of podcasts, and it's like, oh, they are doing so much, and that does give me is like, okay, these people are great at what they do, and maybe I'm not cut out for this. But that's what I'm doing. I'm comparing myself to the people who have done this for few years, and they are probably one of the best people in the game. And then that gives you the feeling of being an imposter, like, do I deserve to be here? Who am I to be here? And so you want to stop comparing. Look at what you have to go do, set yourself goals, and then go do them. Use all of your ability, all of your skill set, and go do them. And you learn along the way. You might trip up on along the way, but you will get up, you will apply those learnings, and then you go do those better things. So I hope these three things really help at least navigate the feelings that you're having. Sometimes you can also discuss these things with a mentor or a coach, because those people also again will provide you that third perspective, or a different perspective. So I also encourage you, I guess this is a bonus tip, is talk to a mentor. So other than talking to colleagues or a friend or spouse, have a mentor or a coach that you talk to, because they are also likely to give you tools to face or manage any of these type of feelings, but they're also likely to give you different perspective, not just one other perspective, but multiple perspectives. And only when you have different perspectives, then you can choose, which perspective do I adopt. You may not be able to choose. The situation around you, the circumstances around you is not your choice to make, but the perspective you hold on it is. Now, I want to touch upon an important or an interesting angle or a perspective to this concept of imposter syndrome. When I was doing my research on imposter syndrome, and I read a lot about, a lot of people feel it. Some statistics were calling out like anywhere from 9 to 80%, which to me just seems like a wide range. That didn't seem very helpful. There are a lot of different statistics, and like, oh, all of us feel it, most of us feel it, 80% feel it. But I was also questioning, why do some people feel it more than the others? Have you thought about this? There are probably different people who feel it at different levels. And again, it can be a lot to do with how you grew up in your childhood, what circumstances you faced, and things like that. There's also an interesting thing that came across my feed, which was, does today's generation, the Gen Z, will they feel it less, or maybe they don't feel it at all? And I think one of the pointers there was, they have a lot of information at hand compared to Gen X's or millennials, because they are growing up in the internet of information at their fingertips, with smartphones, with internet, and everything, even Chat GPT. Um, so when you have a lot of information, you probably grow up to be more confident, and you may have less feelings like this, which is possible. And if there are Gen Zers listening to this out there, I would love to hear from you. Similar to us, like if you've never experienced it, or maybe you're just experiencing it to a lesser degree. Because if you think about it, a lot of times, again, up until I came to Facebook, which was in 2016, and maybe a couple of years after that is probably when I first heard this term called imposter syndrome. But today's generation probably hears it in their 20s or even in their teens. So if you're able to articulate, if you know what something is called, if you have more information, then you're less likely to suffer from it. That might be true. But an interesting take that I saw in one of the Harvard Business Review articles was that, do all of us experience it, or some of us experiences, and does it depend on how society has raised us? The article itself was called "Stop Telling Women That They Have Imposter Syndrome, and Stop Putting the Onus on Those People, women or otherwise, on how to deal with it." So while I just told you how you can kill imposter syndrome, I want to take this different perspective as well, which is it just that you are responsible for managing this imposter syndrome? Or should we also hold organizations accountable to help people manage this imposter syndrome? Are there circumstances that are being created, or that are systemic in nature, that are just happening since many, many years, that lead certain people to have more of this imposter syndrome versus others? Is there is there some sort of a bias that might make people feel more incompetent than they are? If there's a person, maybe they are being put down, ignored, shut down, not heard, they don't feel heard, they don't feel seen, does that contribute to the imposter syndrome? And in a lot of my involvement and participation in community groups, as well as be the ally programs, I and other diversity inclusion programs, I feel like there can be some of these factors at play here that contribute to imposter syndrome occurring more in some people than others. And the reason this resonated with me was because I feel that I might have experienced more of that, as opposed to a pure imposter syndrome as defined uh, by the studies when it was first coined. So, again, for me, I whenever something happened where um, I didn't feel like I was in control, and especially this is like without calling names or naming companies and things like that. Like, I specifically remember a very senior leader constantly being dismissive, constantly shutting me down, not taking my ideas, not having a pleasant conversation with me. And I kept blaming myself, like, I don't think I'm good enough. I don't think I'm cut out for this. I have to work hard. I have to work hard. I have to prove this. And so I would constantly try to work hard until I talked to a colleague who was interacting with the same person, and they told me the same things that I was feeling. And that to me was eye opening. And again, I didn't have these names to say. I didn't know if it was, I didn't know about bias. I didn't know about imposter syndrome and these terminologies and how to be aware of it. I just knew that, oh, all this feeling that I had been harboring for months was not just because I was incompetent. It was probably also in some part due because of the situation, because of the other person and how they were treating me or how I felt I was being treated. Because this can happen to a lot of us. So I really encourage you to also inspect your circumstances around you and build awareness of it. That's why talking to other people also helps. But this is why I also want to encourage organizations to help people tackle the imposter syndrome through the lens of a systemic issue like bias. It can be any sort of bias, but it can be there. And maybe some people who are more routinely biased against might have a bigger degree of imposter syndrome. I don't say that I have any studies to prove this, but this is an interesting angle, interesting take on this subject of imposter syndrome and how to manage it. And I found that very fascinating. So I think even in things like these very touchy subjects about bias, about imposter syndrome, it is very important to have different perspectives, different angles, a different lens with which you can inspect the same thing. Because every perspective will give you new information. So I hope this was helpful. If you have questions around this, if you are experiencing these feelings of self doubt, low self confidence, talk to somebody. And I really encourage you to connect with people, have a community, a group of people who are really close to you and can support you through your journey. I would love to hear your thoughts on the different perspectives on this topic, and I will see you next time with another topic. I'm Priyanka Shinde. Thank you so much for listening and watching this series. I would love to bring you more interesting things in the future as well. So stay tuned and take care. Bye.